We're still in Judges chapter 7, if you want to be turning there. Excuse me. We're also mindful of several of our church family who are on the road today, so we're wanting to be prayerful with respect to them and praying for a safe return to us. Judges 7, we'd gotten to verse 7 last week. Judges 7, verse 7, where the Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand." So we're seeing in these children's stories, at least that's how I think about them often, deeper expression, I hope we're seeing as we go through this time, of God's sovereignty, which is difficult to understand, I think. Good to understand, a challenging thing to understand, and providential care, also a challenging concept, but one that we need to appreciate and continue to strive to understand. See God's power, perhaps as best described in these stories in any place in the Bible, and also his purposes being accomplished and the way he accomplishes them and goes about them. And the encouraging thing, particularly about Gideon, but also in the Daniel story that we're looking at on Sunday evenings also, is God's ability to use people who from outward appearance are at a great disadvantage or a great weakness, or might not have to the human eye perceptible talents or skills that would be useful. And God shows us with him how useful all of you are, all of us are. Another good thing for us to read and remember, I think, is how God continues to be mindful of his people and aware of his people. And that shows especially with Gideon. I hope you're like me as I'm reading Gideon. Gideon does things and asks questions and is reticent about things and is outright fearful about the same kinds of things that I think I would be also as I go through the story, especially with him. But all of these stories and Judges are so good about that. But also this thread, this common thread we see, that God is mindful of those that he uses. And even with the growth that Gideon has exhibited up to this point, he still is in need of reassurance. Well, I know you can identify with that at various times in your lives. I certainly can. God understanding who and what Gideon is, which is, what would you say, formative. He's in the formative stages still of learning about God and who God is and learning about himself with God. That's a challenging lesson for all of us. God follows up the verse 7 statement with more assurance. You see in the second half of verse 8, it has this reminder of verse 1. The Midianites are there. Their camp is in the valley. God follows up the rather challenging warrior selection process or warrior reduction process with thoughtfulness for Gideon. Still, that's ongoing through this. Now, the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. You see that? That's verse 8, part B. The camp of Midian lay below him in the valley, and it's the same description that we've had ongoing here. Verse 9, during that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands." So there's that statement, just a straightforward statement of what's going to take place. But then this, if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So again, promise of God, again, the reassurance of God for his servant. There's this observable pattern in these stories on Sunday morning and Sunday evenings, but in your own study that you're able to see also. And it's the pattern that we still see today in our lives. There's promise by God. There's reassurance from God. There's thoughtfulness and care on the part of God for us. God knows who and what we are. That can be a frightening thing when you think about it, but it's also excellent because our Creator knows us, knows what we need. And if we look for it and are aware of it all through our study, I think we're encouraged by that. God knows you, intimately knows you. Well, here it's you're going to take this camp, stated as fact, and there's something you ought to hear, especially if you're nervous. One, you don't need to go down there alone. Take your servant with you. It doesn't just have to be you. So we see Gideon and Purah and his servant went down to the outposts of the camp. Then verse 12, the Midian, again, the statement again. Midianites, Amalekites, all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand of the seashore. So it's a constant reminder of the human perspective that's interwoven through all of this. The human perspective is just that. Look at all these people. How are we going to do these things? And we're reminded the fact of the size of that camp. And God says, go down into that camp. Now, again, we're also reminded of the odds of success from the human standpoint. Very small, but God is stating it as fact. It will take place. So we're also reminded of the fact, the way God sees things, and how kind of God, the same God that watches over us. If you're afraid, oh, by the way, if you're afraid to attack, then do this. And Gideon, you can imagine him responding, I'm not afraid. I'm petrified. I can't move. I've never encountered anything like this. And God knows. And he continues to provide. That's an important thing for us to remember. Faithful Christians, God continues to provide. He is the provider. He's described that way more than one time, surely and certainly. But he continues to provide. And as we attempt to be his and belong to him and submit to his will and watch for it, you'll see God providing for you over and over again. So he provides. He doesn't compromise his purposes ever. Here with Gideon, he's kind and strict. If you're afraid to attack, gentle and kind. Oh, by the way, if you're nervous, I think this would be helpful to you. But also notice the strictness of God. Then go down into the camp. So you still have to obey. Even in fear, you obey. But it's the kindness and gentleness of God, again, in the expectation that we will do what he says. That's a constancy in the nature of our Heavenly Father. Kind, loving, expectant, and typically expects much more out of you than you will see yourself being able to accomplish, because God knows what's in you and knows what you are with him. But then God gives Gideon the gift of perspective, Gideon's perspective and the perspective of the invaders. They're just set right next to each other. Imagine that, and you have to imagine it because the account doesn't go into much detail, if any, about this. I'm just imagining the trip down to the valley floor that Gideon and Purah take, where they're moving deeper into enemy territory. As we've just been reminded, too many to count. No way to even get a grasp of how many there are. They're like locusts. Everywhere they crept that night, all they saw were these many, many warriors and their supplies and their tents and all the animals and all the things that they would use to make war. And I can imagine, at least with respect to myself, it would almost be a claustrophobic feeling the further you get down away from the safety of the rim and you're surrounded by all of this. Just the sight and the sounds and the smells of an encampment and the animals and the tents and all of the movement that's taken place and the kinds of things you experience when you see huge groups of people that are able to be mobilized to a particular location. And again, I would think it would just be a huge spectacle for Gideon to be taking himself down into. And I can imagine him and his servant looking at each other, in the dark, but with some light coming from the fires, and just how in the world we're going to do this, and how is God thinking that we will do this huge, aggressive, murderous force, because they have experience with all those aspects of these people over a long period of time. So that's one perspective. That's the human perspective. That's Gideon's perspective, observant as he is as he goes down. But then God grants them another perspective, one that they hear this time. They've been seeing and experiencing all of these things over a period of days, really, months, really, but now in particular, just all concentrated at night. And you know how things are at night when you see things at night. All of that's been taking place. But then God gives them this other perspective, one they hear. Remember, God says, go down into the camp and listen to what they're saying, and you'll be encouraged. Listen to what they're saying. So verse 13, Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. I confess, when I read that, I thought about the loaves of bread Mom made when we moved here from Texas. Cooking at altitude. We had a lot of loaves of barley that would knock the door down. She caught on fast and was always an excellent baker of everything. But still, a loaf of barley bread tumbling down into a camp. It struck the tent with such force, the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." Again, imagine hearing that. I would think the first response of Gideon would be, "How do you know who I am? I haven't been the leader for a very long period of time. And then how do you know these other things?" And Gideon and Pur, I would think, would be staring at each other again in disbelief. What did he say? Did you hear that about the bread? Just incredible things for Gideon's mind to take in. Well, this is the member that he's hearing of the conquering countless horde, um, the ravenous warriors who had just poured into the valley. And he's hearing this guy's perspective. In verse 15, when Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshiped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." And God's faith-building approach, we've talked about some off and on, is just in full view as you read this here. This incremental building of Gideon's awareness and his faith toward his heavenly Father. You've seen this before. I hope when we're done with these stories, you actually watch for it in your own life. This experience with God's building your faith and giving you what you can handle. It might seem like more than you can handle. And then you have the ability to look in hindsight at what you thought you never could handle. And you see that with God, you have taken care of it and he's taken care of you. This synergistic pairing of you with your heavenly Father. So from this in channel or in chapter 6 and verse 15, as you recall, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh. I'm the least of my family. Good perspective. You can tell he didn't go to a public school system that raised his self-esteem endlessly. But from that perspective to this in chapter 7 and verse 16, dividing 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them with torches inside. He has seen God. He's seen his God. He's seen Israel's God. Not only in the camp of Israel, where you would expect it, he's seen his God in the camp of the enemy. That's an impressive thing. And you can tell the effect that it has on him. Again, an effect of exposure to God and the way God operates and how it grows you and matures you. So Gideon's instructed by God and he obeyed. As James is still explaining in the 2nd chapter, lo, those many years later, obedience is demonstrated in action. It's not just the verbal profession of I believe, but it's a realization of what it takes to belong to God and how God expects us to act in submission to his will and do things as we study his word and find them there. And in taking the instruction and putting it into action, James says, that's faith. That's faith. It's not just saying you believe. Saying things comes too easily to most of us various times in our life. But here we're seeing all of this. And you can watch for that, young people and us older people, and all of these places in the Old Testament way before James summarizes that in James chapter 2 in a wonderful way. But still, you see it acted out in so many of these stories that are right there at your fingertips and for you to learn. So Gideon heard, Gideon obeyed with action in destroying the altar that his father had built, and that totem and the worship of these foreign gods and how it had been used to worship the foreign gods, the very gods that were leading to the punishment of Israel. And you look back up in chapter 7 and see Gideon has gone from there. But look at verse 15 again. When he hears the further information God provides to him from that enemy's dream, what is his response? Remember, we just read over it. He bowed down and worshiped God. Wonder what that entailed. He's in the dark. He's hiding from them. But this impresses him so much. And he sees so much about his relationship with God in this, that he is moved to worship God. But it's not just a passing, yeah, God, I thank you and I believe you. He bows down before God and worships him. We aren't told, again, the exact form that took, but we're we're seeing the descriptions of the result of it when he worships God. It's that point of realization that we want to have in all of our lives at some point, where you realize from your prayers and your study and your obedience to God that God knows who you are, and you know that you're cared for by God, and you see that here in these other words about a different situation, but it's that same point that we long for and pray about, seeing God's provision for him, and then seeing God aware of him, and then seeing God's purposes revealed. That meant specific things in Gideon's life and what was going to take place. And hopefully we see that in our lives and see specific things that God has in mind for us also. It's the point where things go from book learning to reality and common sense. And notice Gideon now, as he returns to camp, he leads. Characteristics of leadership according to God's will are being formed in Gideon as we watch and read. And now he's showing them, and he's showing them in his life and in his actions. He started that before with the work he was willing to do at night. And now it's continuing. Again, young folks and seasoned folks also, watch for this and expect this in yourselves. Expect this in yourself, regardless of your age. Especially watch for it when you're young. Develop that habit when you're young. You seasoned, mature folks are still being used by God if you're watching for it. And now back to the 300. They've been waiting while all this is going on. Where's our leader? Well, I think he's creeping down into the camp. That's the word I got. You can imagine they're just thinking, what in the world? And the ones who have waited and come through the selection process, the ones who have watched the majority of their friends, and in some cases their family members, leave and just take off, depart for their homes. They've watched 32,000 be reduced to just them in a relatively amazingly short period of time. And now they hear Gideon as a result of further insurance from God. Now they hear Gideon, the leader, say, okay, here's the plan. Here's the strategy. These are God's purposes. It's going to happen at night. You'll be positioned along the ridge, overseeing the encampment below. You have to space yourselves out. Remember, there's 300 of you. Encircle the valley below. Each one take a trumpet, a torch, a big jar, light the torch, put it inside the jar. You can read this for yourselves, and you should always check what I'm telling you. You're going to need to blow your trumpet, break the jar, shine the torch out into the night, and shout. And I know I said last week kind of facetiously that did not reflect a lot of military training as we think of military training, but think of the aspects of military training that you participate in also, that it does reflect. In reality, they had to completely follow the instructions. They had to do so even when it made no sense to them at all. It even made them fearful. They had to do so perhaps with the most important military skill, courage, or at least the ability to get their fear subservient to their sense of duty, bravery, in effect. All needed military skills. And I know some of you bright bulbs are already thinking and seeing the comparison to Christian life, what we have to learn in order to belong to God and be effective in usefulness to God, to continue to learn all of our lives, to remain faithful to him, to be useful to him, especially when, not only when, but especially when things don't make any sense to us, because very often in life, that's exactly what will be taking place. What's the verse? You walk by faith, not by sight, not by understanding. And that's exactly what the Christian life calls for. So in that sense, these 300 needed the ultimate military skill for spiritual warfare, as we do, the ultimate skills that God describes to us. And again, in these stories, and we'll close with this, we're seeing the power of God unique to each story. We're seeing the power of God, the wisdom of God, the kindness of God, the provision of God, the care of God, all things that these stories make manifestly available to us. First, when we're children, and then as we grow older and gain experience, even more effective in our lives, hopefully as we read back through them and study them and see what's there we might not have seen the first time through. As we conclude this morning, if you need to respond to the invitation of our Heavenly Father the one who knows you and cares about you and is providing for you, even still, continuing to provide for you now. If you need to respond to his invitation, please consider carefully doing that, and then feel comfortable in doing that. If you need to ask for the help and the prayers of your church family in some way of which we're not particularly aware, then trust that that is something we want to make available to you also. So if you need to respond, please do so. Come to the front, sit on the front row of chairs while we stand together and sing the invitation song.